I'm so excited to share our next guest with you, Jason Earle, the founder of 1-800-GOT-MOLD. He's a former Wall Street trader turned founder CEO of 1-800-GOT-MOLD. We had talked about many different topics and how he leveraged different opportunities to turn that into the business that he runs today. He had talked about how he overcame serious personal issues, including his mom's suicide, his own Lyme disease, to galvanize his purpose, his capabilities to be this mission-driven entrepreneur that he is today. We had talked about mental models that he used as a way to choose the problem he wants to solve. We had talked about where he is uniquely qualified to make the kind of impact that he wants to make. We also had talked about the life of being a seeker and how being a seeker is very helpful for him to hone his edge as a mission-driven entrepreneur. We also had talked about the different books that he's encountered that really changed his perspective in life, in business, in relationships. Lastly, he also talked about his daily rituals, such that he's ready to go every morning and face his next challenge. So, for those of you interested in leveling up your game as a mission-driven entrepreneur, this is an interview you don't want to miss. Noble Warrior, I'm really excited to have my new friend, Jason Earle, to be with us today. He's the CEO of GotMall.com and got a fascinating story, open book, another Noble Warrior who's willing to share his journey, his tactics, his mindset with all of you, all of us here. So welcome to the show, Jason. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you actually had a really fascinating story. Why don't we actually go there first? Why did you start GotMold.com versus anything else that you could be doing in the world?
Let's just jump right in. That's just great. I'm in the mold business by virtue of personal experience. It's one of those things that you would never really think the mold industry has appeal, right? People don't think of that as something that's got a lot of. I mean, I don't think there's even a curriculum that would get you properly trained for what we do. I'm in the healthy home business really more broadly, but I would say more accurately. And so within that healthy home space, I am the founder of a company called 1-800-GOT-MOLD, which is a mold inspection company that does not do remediation. So we do diagnostics, inspection, basically sick building investigations, where people believe that their house or their workplace is affecting their health adversely. And we go in and do the detective work, figure out what's going on, and then bring in whatever resources in terms of contractors, not on a subcontractor basis, but we select and vet contractors who will come in and follow our scope of work, remediate the building. Then we do the testing at the end, do all the verification and make sure it's been done properly before the final funds are released. And so in essence, what we do is we guide them through the entire process so that they don't have to experience the learning curve of dealing with a mold problem. And so I've been in that business now for about 17 years, which is crazy. And that came after a career on Wall Street. I was a stockbroker for 9 years. And we can talk about that too. That we can start in the present and we'll go back to the past and we'll weave it all together. But the mold business came in, it was sort of one of these things that in retrospect, it makes complete sense, but I never would have predicted this in a million years. If you told me 20 years ago that I'd be, in the mold business or the CEO and founder of 1-800-GOT-MOLD, I would have laughed you out of the room. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But now, because of what we'll talk about today, it makes nothing but sense. So I actually, after leaving Wall Street, I was looking for something meaningful to do with my life. I had a really nice career in my early 20s, and I wanted to do something that would be a contribution to the greater good. On Wall Street, there was none of that. The people who benefited the most were the people who owned the stores where I shopped. That was it, right? I was a money changer for all intents and purposes. If things went well, I made rich guys richer. If things didn't go well, then I was, causing harm. So it was really kind of one of those things where it rang very hollow for me. And my mom's voice always echoed in the back of my mind because when I was a kid, she had me volunteer at the local hospital where she was an administrator. And it was mostly because she didn't want me to stay home during the summer times, I think probably due to fear that I would burn the house down. But what she did do was indoctrinate me into a service-based attitude. And so her hospital was a physical rehab center, occupational and occupational and whatever the rehabilitation. So it was a lot of amputees and brain trauma. And so my jobs were throughout the hospital, delivering goods to the store, to the floors, and, dealing with dietary and all that kind of stuff. So I got a lot out of contribution. My mom's philosophy was always that if you help improve the quality of other people's lives, the byproduct of that is a great quality of life for yourself, right? So it's almost like the philosophy that if you help enough people get what they want, you'll get what you want. And so Wall Street didn't push that or didn't scratch that itch for me. But while I was on Wall Street, I would volunteer, go to various different, I volunteered for Operation Smile, did a couple of international missions with them. And every time I came back from one of those, which are exhausting and, they were time consuming, I felt more fulfilled than any vacation where I was, lounging at the beach, being waited on hand and foot. And so while I was I left Wall Street right around September 11th. And while I was backpacking around, I ended up in Hawaii. And I was spending some time on the various islands. But while I was in Oahu, I was reading about this mold problem that had been discovered in the Hilton Kalia Tower. So the flagship property for Hilton on Oahu, Waikiki Beach, their main building there was shut down for this massive mold problem. And initially, they thought it was about a $500,000 problem. What happened was a maid found it, and they began opening up the walls. And as is common with big mold problems, what you find is generally the tip of the iceberg. And as you begin unraveling the building, it's like Pandora's box. And so what was initially a $500,000 problem became a $5 million problem, and then a $55 million problem. And so it was big news on this little island, to say the least. And so there were lots of stories in the local papers about people who had been affected by the moldy conditions in the hotel. And one particular story jumped out at me. It was a gentleman who, in his 40s, developed adult onset asthma, which I'd never even heard of. And he was also allergic to all sorts of foods and things that he had never been sensitive to before. And it was a deja vu moment for me. It was like it like jumped out, and it brought me back to my own childhood, because when I was 4 years old, I lost about 30% of my body weight in a 3-week period. And my mom, being in healthcare, was duly concerned, and they brought me to get to the doctor, and the doctor suggested that I go to Children's Hospital, and they initially diagnosed me with cystic fibrosis, which was a devastating diagnosis. My father had lost 4 of his cousins before the age of 14 to that. So it was in our genes, and that was probably why it was such a quick diagnosis. But a second round of tests about 6 weeks later concluded that I didn't have cystic fibrosis, evidenced by the fact that I sit here with you, at 43 years old. But actually what I had was asthma compounded by pneumonia. And I was allergic to every single thing in my environment. They did an allergy test on me where they put me in this papoose. And it's one of my earliest memories, actually. It's a formative memory where they basically put you in a papoose, or like a straitjacket with your back exposed. And they have effectively a grid on your back. And they did the skin testing on me. And so they put all the antigens. And my dad said I looked like a ladybug. My back just turned red with spots all over it. So I was allergic to grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, even cotton. And so I lived on a then non-working farm surrounded by grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, and obviously cotton. And so I really lived on inhalers until I was about 12 years old. And my folks split up, and the house was sold, and my symptoms disappeared. And I never thought about it, really. I didn't give it much examination. My grandfather had grown out of his asthma, and so I think the family probably assumed as much. And that it was also true for me. And so I sailed off into the sunset. So I'm sitting here in Hawaii, and it was like the light went on, and so I called my father from a payphone, which probably isn't there anymore, and said, "Hey, Dad, do you think we had a mold problem at Old Trenton Road?" And he laughed at me. He's like, "Jason, of course we had mold. We had mushrooms growing in the basement. Why do you ask?" And it was like I just immediately knew that I wanted to pursue this idea of how buildings impact people's health. Because absent that exposure, my immune system was no longer on high alert, and these things that it was receiving as threats were no longer threats. They were part of my normal environment. And so I'm now I'm allergic to nothing, zero, zilch, right? So all my friends who are doctors who refer patients to us are they're always amazed that I have absolutely no allergies whatsoever. So anyway, so I read this story. I immediately call my father. I get this validation. I come back to New Jersey armed with curiosity. and time. I was looking for a career change, and I took a job working for, actually answered an ad, working for a company doing basement waterproofing and mold remediation, and basically just roll up my sleeves and start, from the ground up. And I had been a stockbroker, right? So this is a big shift to going from stock brokerage to contractor sale. But it wasn't long after I was working with them that I realized that I had basically jumped out of the frying pan of working with Wall Street guys that were pretty scurrilous into this contracting world, where these guys doing mold remediation were actually doing really bad work. And they were in many cases causing more harm than they were good, because they were contaminating houses and things like that, using chemicals. And so I saw an opportunity to create a company that would actually protect the consumer, that would guide them through the process, and to insulate them from these players, these guys that at the time there was no industry standard. It was like the wild, wild west. There was no regulation or anything, and even where it is now in place, those regulations are very poorly enforced. So anyway, that's what got me into the mold inspection or assessment business. It was really the idea of helping people through this process, which I saw as complicated, even being in the business, seeing how people simply couldn't do it on their own without making incredible mistakes, which have long-term consequences to their health and value and saleability and habitability of their homes. And so at the time, I was dating this woman, and she was inspired by my interest in this, and she heard about a guy who trained dogs to sniff out mold in buildings. I tell you all this for a reason, but it was a crazy idea. But I flew down to Florida and I met this dog trainer, and he introduced me to who would become my four-legged partner for 12 years. Her name is Oreo. And Oreo and I came back armed with, together to go and sniff out mold in buildings. But really, it was a true secret weapon, because people were so attracted to the idea of using a rescue dog to sniff out hidden mold in buildings, so we ended up really getting a lot of traction through the press.
So pause for a second. I mean, because you actually jump the transformation story quite a lot, right? So I want to backtrack for a moment. So you're in Hawaii backpacking, and discover this huge problem that a lot of people experience, the unhealthy home symptoms, right, of having mold. And then you just decided that, oh, wow, this is quite a transformational mechanism from your own childhood. But what I wanted to focus on this is because a lot of times people, entrepreneurs especially, would see a problem and they want to solve for this problem, right? But going from a Wall Street guy who makes tons of money to a contract guy, I mean, that's a pretty big jump from identifying the problem to say, I want to be part of the solution, to jumping into becoming a contractor in a mold business, right? So that's a huge leap of faith on your part. So if you don't mind going back to the internal state, because outside
I tend to jump. I did jump over that. That's a very critical part. So I think the connectedness to my own personal story was really obviously the linchpin for me. What I realized in this space, was that this is a problem larger than me, and that no matter how long I work on this, I'll never be able to truly solve it. But I did believe that there was being done so poorly that any effort that I made in this direction would yield tremendous benefit to lots of people, right? And so it became clear to me that we all live in buildings, we all breathe air, right? When I started looking at the statistics, there are 37 million Americans in the United States that suffer from chronic sinusitis, and that's the most prevalent long-term illness in America. According to the Mayo Clinic, 96% of more of those cases are mold-related. Now, most of those 37 million people don't know that, and I figured that's a bridge to build, right? So people are aware of that, and then also 24 million cases of asthma in America, of which 10 million are children. According to and that number's up 100%, by the way, in the last 10 years. The childhood asthma, the pediatric asthma cases are up 100% in the last 10 years. So all of those statistics continue to come my way as I'm looking at this industry and seeing how badly it's being done and seeing the need for it. And I realized that there were opportunities in there that were significant financially speaking. If you could solve enough of those problems, then the rewards would be there. But I also got so much gratification in the early days, not only from the people that we were helping, but really also the idea that I had no idea what I was doing. It was completely making it up as I went along. There were no courses to take. So I got really inspired by the idea of sort of a rebirth for myself. But I kept thinking about the fact that the vast majority of people who go through this are really truly they had no idea how much of a fulcrum or how much of a leverage point this particular thing, this mold problem in their life could be. It could either be solved and they would never think about it again, or it could be exacerbated and it could literally change the trajectory of their entire lives. And so it became my mission to help people navigate that, knowing the import of the outcomes. And the more I did it, the more I realized that any obstacle I had to overcome in order to get there was worth it, because the problem and the significance of that opportunity was so big.
So was the aha moment literally the call with your father to say, holy shit, of course, this was the thing. Was that the moment where that became your mission?
It's a really good question. And I'm glad you're asking that, because the initial response coming from a guy who was at Wall Street, I would say the vast majority of my concern was, is there a business here?
Hey, listeners, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the nuggets of wisdoms, go to bit.ly/Noble Warrior Review and leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you're getting out of this podcast. This will really help us attract other people like you and share these nuggets of wisdoms to others just like you. Okay, do that right now, bit.ly/Noble Warrior Review. Thanks a lot.
Am I going to be able? What can I charge? Is there a large enough total addressable market there? Is there a competitive? What's the competitive landscape look like? I looked at it from the perspective of a business person, but the more I got into it, the more I realized that the mission, which I put front and center in the beginning, the mission became a larger part of it. And as that mission, as it actually did truly consume more of my thoughts, I would say it was more of a gradual process where I realized that this could be my mission. But I didn't realize until I actually really ran into some hard times and was willing to continue through those hard times that it was my mission. That's actually probably it was probably at my darkest hour. There was a point where we almost went out of business, actually several times. And it was during those darkest hours where I had to make a decision. And that's what galvanized that. So that's a great question. And I never really thought about whether there was a moment. I saw that it could be, and then I made a decision that it was.
Yeah. And by the way, the context of this question is because a lot of people listening to this are in the transition, career-wise, business-wise, whatever it may be, and they're grappling with that themselves, right? And is it like an inside out, like, hey, this is my mission. No matter what, I'm going to make it happen. Damn it. Right. I want to solve this big problem for my younger self, let's say. Or an outside in approach, be like, hey, huge business. Let me just keep cracking at it. And I asked that more specifically during the dark times, as you said, because we, as entrepreneurs, we go out and do certain things. We have a vision. But the realization of this vision from the moment you conceive this idea to the actual feedback loop isn't always there. Isn't like, oh, boom, I have an idea, millions of dollars comes in, positive feedback. It's not like that.
That's a liability if that happens sometimes, right?
Right, exactly, right.
You haven't discovered anything.
Infrastructure, whatever, right? But that's what they want. So what I wanted to dive a little deeper is, how did you find that courage to keep moving forward in spite of the lack of immediate feedback, business-wise, support from family or friends or girlfriends, whatever, or that internal faith in yourself that you, my friend Jason, are the guy to actually make this happen? Because in the dark times, what naturally comes is, maybe I'm not the guy. Maybe what I thought was the total addressable market just isn't there. maybe the strategy I'm going about it isn't blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of like samsara in the spiritual, people call it, right? Samsara, this fear that comes in. So I'm curious to know, during those dark times, how did you actually navigate that space such that you continue to move forward, continue to, believe in yourself, your capability, your strategy, your eye, your vision to keep address this addressable market?
So I think there's a couple things that come to mind right away. First of all, I started talking about the dogs because that was there's a major. I think that's why I was driving towards that part of the story, because a lot of it had to do with burning the ships, making a complete and total immersive commitment that was that you couldn't really turn back from. But the preceding component that I think is really important is that I had been given the gift of adversity at a young age, and so I have mined those experiences as a child and even as a young adult to find comfort in discomfort, and to realize that the only true lessons I've ever learned came from what people would call negative experiences. I don't call them negative experiences, bad experiences. Painful maybe at the time, but what we call negative or bad is generally speaking a very premature judgment. At the very least, because the things that I would say are the most negative or the worst experience of my life by external judgment are the absolute most powerful, important experiences. So as a kid, I grew up in a really kind of, I'll sort of give you the preamble on this, but I had a really rocky childhood. My parents were tumultuous, alcoholic, all that good stuff. Sort of the textbook. I'm sure a lot of our entrepreneur brethren are connecting on that. But we grew up and I was an only child with several siblings, but all half siblings. So my mom had been previously married. I had an older sister through that marriage. My dad had been previously married. He subsequently gotten remarried and had other children as well. So, I was an entrepreneur early on. And I had to make money because my parents didn't have any. I had to make money to get what I wanted. So they always said that. So I had various different businesses as a child all over the place. I always had more money in my pocket than my parents did. That's for sure. Whether it was going to the golf course and finding the golf balls around the perimeter of the water holes and then washing them off and then selling them back to the golfers, or we were selling sodas and water to the construction workers in our booming veteran community, New York City veteran community, who would just buy them for 10 cents at what was, I guess, the Costco at the time, and we sell them to the construction workers for $1, in our little red wagon. So I always had that was always my inclination. But then my mom committed suicide when I was 14 years old. And she had been making she had been driving in that direction for a long time. So it was really not a surprise at the time. And then I got Lyme disease, or I was diagnosed with Lyme disease about a year later. And then so that was a very difficult time. And around that time I was experimenting with psychedelics heavily. I think partially for escapist reasons, but also because I had found just a tremendous amount of insight from them at the time when I had been experiencing all this really sort of existential loss, really, the loss of my mother, and then dealing with the Lyme disease really took a lot out of me. It was 30 pills. It was in the early 90s, so there wasn't a standard protocol. There was not a lot of research, and so I was on 30 pills a day of antibiotics for 3 days. 3 days on, 3 days off, and I was sick and vomiting for 3 days, and I'd sleep for 3 days. So they basically forced me to drop out of high school. And it's through that actually. So I'll tell you. So they called me in from class, and they notified me that I violated their attendance policy. And I had a good relationship with all the teachers. They knew that I was going through a lot of stuff, and I got A's on all my tests, but I never did any of the homework. So I got C's and D's and F's because I would sleep in class. I was a terrible, terrible, terrible student. I didn't want to be there. They didn't want me there. So they brought me into the principal's office and said, you violated attendance policy, and this is it's not working here. So we've decided that you're going to have to repeat your junior year. And I was in my junior year. They said, so you have to stay and repeat it again. So I said, well, you want me to stay for the rest of the year and then come back and do this again? It doesn't make much sense to me. So basically we resolved that I was going I was going to drop out. So I went to another payphone, called my father from a payphone, and told him that I wanted to drop out of high school, and that I wanted to get my GED and start college a year early. I wanted to leapfrog. And so my dad's a little bit of a rebel, and so he signed me out of school that day. And I was working in the gas station where I had previously been part-time, and I got full-time hours. And the guy came in with a flat tire on his BMW, and he asked me to fill his tire with air, and I did. But actually, he asked me to fill his tire with air, and I said I can fill it with air, but it'll be flat again before you know it. I said, if you give me a few minutes, I can fix it for you. He said, if you can do it fast, there's money in it for you. And I said, all right, fine. So we rolled over to the pump, and you could see the nail sticking out. So I took the nail out, I plugged it, filled it with air, and I said $5. And he put some money in my hand, drove away. And when I looked at my hand, it was a $50 bill. So I in my youthful, I was 16 years old. I thought it was all the money. I never got a $50 tip, So I thought it was a mistake. So I put the $50 bill in my pocket, and I waited for him to come back. I thought for sure he was going to come back and say, sorry, kid, that was it. And he didn't. But 2 weeks later, I saw him again, and I walked up to him, and I said, hey, mister, I don't know if you realize, I don't know if you remember me. I'm the kid who fixed your tire. And he's like, yeah, Jason, right? And he remembered my name. So it was the first big lesson in how to win friends and influence people. And I said, yeah. I can't believe you remember my name. But I said, I don't know if you realize it, but, you give me a $50 bill for a $5 repair, And he goes, I didn't have 100. And I was like, mind blown. So I just was such a naive little, kid in the boonies. And so I said, I feel like if anything, then I owe you a favor or something. He's like, kid, you don't get it. Like, if anything, I owe you a favor. And I said, well, what do you do for a living? He said, I work on Wall Street. And I said, how about get me a job? And he goes, you only get in life what you ask for. So write down my number and call me by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't ever bother calling me at all. And I was like, all right, where's the pen? And I just found a pen, and I didn't have a piece of paper. So I started writing his number down on my hand. And he started laughing. He rolls up his sleeve, and he had stock quotes written all over his arm, all over his arm. And he goes, kid, you're going to fit right in. And so I was like, all right, mister, I'll call you tomorrow. He's like, yeah, we'll see. And he drove off. So I went home and told my father, I said, you wouldn't believe what just happened. I met this guy. And, I think most parents would be pretty skeptical, and they would probably caution their kid against getting their expectations up and probably be concerned, like, is he a normal guy? What's he asking the kid, 16-year-old, gas jockey for, his son? It could have been perceived as strange. But I called him at 8:59 because I was concerned. I wasn't sure how hard that 9 o'clock was. So I dialed the phone at 8:59, and he said, hey, you called? And I said, of course I did. And he goes, what are you doing today? And I said, I'm going to work. He goes, where? I said, the gas station. He says, wrong answer. And I was like, can we do that again? He said, yeah. And I said, he goes, what are you doing today? And I said, going to work. He said, where? And I said, what's your address? And he said, 88 Pine Street, 10th floor. And it hangs up. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I put on my finest pair of jeans for my Wall Street interview. I didn't have a suit. I'm 16 years old, I was literally planning to go to work at the gas station. So I called out of work, and I put on my finest pair of jeans, and I borrowed some penny loafers from my dad, and I put on a button-down shirt and a sweater over, and I flipped on my way to Wall Street. And the guy was the managing director of a brokerage firm. That's a whole nother story, but he ended up recruiting me and training me and took me under his wing. And I unknowingly, at the time, about a year later, I had my license. I became the youngest licensed stockbroker in history with a Guinness World Record.
Wait, you were in the Guinness World Record?
I have a Guinness World Record for being the youngest licensed stockbroker in history. Yeah.
How cool is that? Wow.
Yeah. Well, that and $1.50 will buy about a half a slice of pizza in New York City these days. But it was a time and a place, and it was a wild time. It was the early 90s. So and I was a stockbroker from 1994 until 2001. And wow. So I had a nice career. I started a month after the first World Trade Center bombing, and I quit a month before September 11th.
Wow.
So bookends, it was.
Wow.
And so, but this all circles back to the question about.
So by the way, I just want to underline this, listeners. Opportunity is when preparation. Sorry, luck is preparation meets opportunity, and the fact that you didn't just you not only showed up in your life, but also you took action. You're ready to actually pounce on this and say, "Hey, I'm going to be working for you. Let me figure out how to do it." So this is a beautiful illustration of that.
What was also funny was the first thing was that there are a lot of lessons in there. He remembered my name, so I try to make a point of remembering people's names, even the people who fix my tires. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just a conscientiousness. It doesn't. These are there's no person you should remember and person that doesn't matter. Right? So I'm terrible at it, but it's something I strive to do. the other thing was that showing up, in fact, he said, you showed up. And I said, yeah, I can't believe, I don't know why you're so surprised about that. And he said, 90% of success in life is showing up, kid. And I didn't realize he was quoting Woody Allen at the time, but it's true too, right? I mean, like, if you just show up, that's 99% of the problems you have out there with people is that they don't show up emotionally, physically, or otherwise. They don't show up, right? If everyone just showed up, we could get a lot more stuff done. And then he took me under his wing, and he really did. He put me through the ringer. It was a hellish training, and he didn't do it intentionally. He did it intentionally. He made it difficult, and he knew that it was going to be difficult. But he made it more difficult. I just had brunch with him 2 weeks ago. He's one of my closest friends. He's
awesome. That's awesome.
And Randy, he's just like my heart, right? You guys are the best. But he gave me my first book, Think and Grow Rich. He gave me my first self-help book. While I was working for him, within a few weeks, right down the street, there was a Rand McNally store that had an audiobook section. And I loaded up with the little bit of money I had. I was getting paid $200 a week. And I buy audiobooks. Zig Ziglar, See You at the Top, my first one. I was listening to cassette tapes at my desk while I was, making phone calls. But I had to make 400 phone calls a day. I was getting paid $200 a week. Eventually, I moved into his apartment. I was paying him $600 a month for rent, so I had $200 left for myself. I had about $3 a day budget, so I lived on hot dogs and knishes and whatever else. I had holes in the bottom of my shoes. It was like a Horatio Alger story, but it was real, and I lived it, But it was hard work. I would get in there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd work until 10 o'clock at night. And if you made 400 phone calls a day to become a successful stockbroker, you had to make 400 calls a day. And if one guy said yes to you, you were going to make $1 million that year. If you could do that every day, that means 99.75% failure rate is the key to success in that business. Yeah, the 399 phone calls out of the 400 will be failures. And that one is all you needed. And so when I look at the obstacles in my path now, I think I'm guaranteed I'm not going to fail 99.75% of the time in my current occupation. So, this is a training ground. So for that reason, I think a lot of times having early adversity is your greatest gift. People, unfortunately, don't necessarily reorder that or reframe it early enough in their life to recognize that that's where the gold is. They think that they should have been like the silver spoon kid who has it easy, who doesn't have to work so hard, right? I'm really excited about the fact that I was the hand-me-down kid. My parents had no money. I had to go figure out how to do those things on my own. The greatest gift I had was not being like my wealthy friends, because I had no choice but to figure out what that path would look like on my own. Right.
So let me actually underline something real quick, because a lot of people, especially cerebral folks, overachievers, they would look at the self-help industry, quote unquote, right? These books, Think and Grow Rich, Meet You at the Top, Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins, as like woo-woo, whatever stuff, right? As you can imagine, I'm hosting this Noble Warrior podcast is all about that, because in my mind, is if we can figure out how to use the internal resources that we have, our mind, our body, our spirit, our emotions, our heart, to the extent where we actually align ourselves to what we're here to do, then we can have a life of more meaning and more purpose in our life. So I'm curious to know from your point of view, because you received that gift super young, 15. I wish I had received that gift in a very cultivated way at 15. So for those people who are like, I don't know about Tony Robbins or NLP, plant medicine, psychedelics, all these things, what would you say to them?
I would say that if you're willing to look at the world honestly, and if you can suspend disbelief and simply look at objective reality, which is a really hard thing to do. I mean, that's a hard thing to do on an ongoing basis. But if you can look at this is evidence-based stuff, right? And I it's proven that you can drive yourself into a tizzy if you want to destroy your life. That's a pretty easy path. You know how to do that, right? That's and the same thing goes with success. I think you start to realize that all of these teachers all are teaching something similar. They may call these things differently, but there's a common thread, and you can say that with the great religions, the common thread on all those things are what I'm interested in. I don't care about the labels or even what you call your path or whatever. The commonality, the common denominator there is consistent, and it comes down to being willing to willingness, I think, is the first step, right? And willingness gives you open-mindedness. And I think that those are the most important steps when you're starting to make a transformation in your life. Because it's the preconceived notions, it's the ego, it's all these resistances, it's the voices in your head that have gotten you to where you are that will keep you where you are, right? So I really do think it comes down to open. Now, a lot of people find their way they just bump into stuff eventually and they realize that's not working. But I do think it comes down to just plain and simple willingness. And then to be willing to look at the world honestly, because the teachers are out there. We live in the most amazing time in the world because you don't have to go down the street to the Rand McNally store like I did and buy an audiobook with money you don't have. It's available online for free. The podcast, oh my God, that was like, that doesn't get dream come true. I mean, it's just amazing. So anybody, a seeker, being a seeker is what would be my number one recommendation. But I don't know that you can give anybody that. Wisdom has to be discovered. It can be offered, but it can't be transferred. Right. And so I don't know I think that when they say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I think that when it comes down to, looking at someone who is not open-minded, that I would say probably they're not ready.
So one of the things that I teach personally, as well as to all of my participants, as well as to this podcast, is, in my mind, after all these years of studying, reflecting, all of it, to me, life is a game of awareness. The more awareness we have internally and externally, the more effective we can be to impact the external world the way that we want to, right? So when it comes down to it, all of it is awareness and then effectiveness, right? So thank you for sharing that story. I want to segue back when you were 14, 15, because your mom committed suicide at 14. You had Lyme disease at 15, right? One may say huge traumatic events. And a lot of people would see that as, wow, I've, experienced misfortune, bad luck, woe is me. You didn't let that stop you. Rather, nowadays, you see as a blessing. So tell us a little bit about that journey going from, wow, this is shitty, right? How do I turn it into a gift?
I don't know what exactly was the catalyst for it was a rapid awareness though. When my mom died, it was a major shock, of course, but it was a shock to the point where I didn't believe it for weeks. I would actually go to the grocery store and I'd see her, back of her head, and then she'd turn around and it was some other woman, right? And I'd play all sorts of games. I even called my home phone and just to hope that she would answer. I was in total denial about it. But at the same time, I knew it was true because we had been through this. So she had attempted a couple of other times. And so, and in that way, it was kind of a relief, strangely. But I had a lot of time to contemplate this. And I remember that the anger that came up first was that it was not her life to give away. And what was interesting about that was that I didn't believe it was her life to give away, that this is a gift.
What do you mean by that?
This is a gift, right? This is not, I don't believe that, I believe that we have a response. This is a gift. And yes, I guess it is your life. You can do with it what you want. And so if that's your choice, but I felt that it was so precious that it was a gross misuse of this gift. And it was interesting because that was a shift in mindset for me because I had been so unhappy. And I would say suicidal ideation. I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I had lots of thoughts and I was listening to terrible music. I was a textbook example of garbage in, garbage out. And so I was, but I will say that, the psychedelics, specifically the plant medicine, I was experimenting a lot with psilocybin at the time. I had a tremendous amount of insights into the connectedness of everything. And also into the forgiveness.
So you did it 14, 15 is during that time?
Yeah, throughout high school, even or earlier, even in a
recreational way or more of an intentional way?
in it, you know what? It was intentional. I was always interested. I'd read a lot of, the beatnik stuff, and I was interested in sort of in the alternative thought that came from that period. So yes, there was, I think, a degree of escapism, of course, and it was obviously experimentation. But I started really seeing the gifts that come from that, the different insights. And as you say, awareness is what it's really all about. It's the ability to see from different perspectives, which teach you that the one that you have isn't it. It's not it. In fact, it's barely anything. It's an incredible illusion, and I will show you how it's an illusion because I can change it quickly with this very simple molecule, and then you'll experience a very different reality, and you can't tell me that's not real, right? So changing awareness, changing perspectives was something that I found to be really useful in right sizing myself, and then also. But I went from being extremely. It was depression. There was no. I tend to not use those kinds of labels, but I was deeply depressed and really kind of wondering what woe is me. There were times when I wouldn't get the Lyme disease and all this stuff.
Right.
But really, the gift of her death actually made me a grateful person. I realized in examining her process that her perspective was that she couldn't see past the tip of her nose. She had her hand in front of her face and she couldn't see that it was her own hand, right? Blocking her. So she lost perspective on the grandeur and the majesty of the universe. She I would sit there in the middle of the meadow and think about how, we're sitting here on a rock spinning around in space. And then we get just close enough to the sun in the summer that we get hot, and we don't burn into a crisp, and then just far enough away in the winter that we get cold, but we don't turn into a ball of ice. That delicate balance is just so extraordinary. How could you ever want to truncate the timetable on this very limited time we have? And so it was really, I think, her lack of appreciation for that galvanized my sense of gratitude more than anything else.
Thank you for sharing that. As you're speaking, there's a internet meme that comes to mind. I don't know if you've seen it. This is a little boy on the ground with a boot on his face, as if someone is stepping onto him. And then the next frame is, the boot was his hand wearing a boot on his face. That's what he's talking about. Because, Buddhist principles, life is suffering. Pain may be inevitable, but it is what we give it, the story we tell, that makes the pain even worse, that turn into suffering.
Yeah, so, I think that's a misquote. I've often thought that that the idea that suffering is part of life. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Mm-hmm. I think that might be a translational issue. Pain is part of life. Mm-hmm. Suffering is truly optional. And suffering has to do with identifying that pain as you, and some of the stuff that I do now as a seeker and as a I hope more and more conscious adult is put myself into situations where physically I'm uncomfortable. The Wim Hof type stuff, hot and cold contrast therapies, and when you're doing it right, you are stepping back, you're sitting back, observing. When you're the observer of the pain and you're not there's a tremendous liberation that happens there, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that if you start looking around at the world, hormesis is one of the most amazing things in the world, right? Hormesis. So, there's proof that pain, there's evidence-based. This goes back to what I was saying before about if you're a seeker and you're willing to look at the world honestly, you'll see that what you think, what your body thinks, what your ego thinks is opposite game. It's everything is opposite day, right? Mm-hmm. Pain is your friend. Pleasure is your enemy. I've never learned any great lesson from pleasure. I've learned bad lessons. I've learned what not to do, right? Mm-hmm. I've learned to get lazy. I've learned to take shortcuts. I've learned that that it's me, that I'm doing this thing, right? When things are going well. When things are not going well, that's where the goal is, right? And I'm not saying that you should sabotage your life, but I have a feeling that I've done that more than once or twice subconsciously in order to facilitate some growth in my life. If I wasn't, the kid with the boot on my own head or putting obstacles in front of me, I sometimes, like I said, think that I wrote the script of this movie, because not only is it pretty dramatic, I like the outcome. I like
the what?
I love the story. I love this story.
Yeah. So one thing is, again, we're mixing analogies a little bit, but I love to look at our life as we're the script writer, the actor, the director, everything all in one. So if you don't like the way the story is going, there's probably some huge lessons there. But if you don't like the way it's going, you are the script writer.
Right.
You're the director. You can totally rewrite it the way that you want to, whatever that may look like. And if you enjoy, quote unquote, enjoy the suffering, great. Continue to go down that path. But ultimately, I believe that's we're the master of our life, we're the captain of our soul, right?
Well, and you also have to make a decision if you want happiness or not, right? So the first step is again willingness. If you decide you want happiness and you're willing, it's like what Mickey Singer says in Untethered Soul. Mm-hmm. The first decision is: are you committed to being happy? Are you committed to being happy? Because if you are, then you're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not you want to hold on to that thing that's making you miserable, or let it go. So it's pretty binary when Michael Singer talks about it, right? But the process of getting there may not be so straightforward.
So let me bring back to your story, because we're digressed quite a bit. So you identify a market opportunity. You have then identified, hey, this is part of my story, overcoming asthma, creating a healthy home for others. And you're willing to go through the journey of whatever challenge that may come, starting a business, this and that. So for the entrepreneurs that's listening to this, they're going through in the middle of it right now. Do you have any framework, tactical things that they can start thinking about? Because it's not easy in that space, being challenged. It's not fun. It's not pleasant. It's kind of like being an ice bath, actually. It's not too far from that, right? So what would you say to them such that they can either refine their vision, refine their strategy, or refine their action?
It depends. If I'm talking to a purpose-driven entrepreneur, that's a different conversation rather than just an entrepreneur who's sort of chasing the
people listening to this. Chances are they want to bring more purpose and meaning in the thing that they do, not just a pure money-driven venture. Even though, it's both.
When you're running into obstacles, you're always going to be questioning whether or not you're doing the right thing. And, the biggest problem with entrepreneurship is that it's a very solitary thing. It's a very lonely thing. And you, generally speaking, if you're asking for advice, you're asking for advice from people who have a conflict of interest in the situation. So if it's your wife or girlfriend or parent or investor, they, generally speaking, are much more risk averse than the entrepreneur who's, and they want the best for you, but they're scared too. They're more scared. And so it's a really lonely place if you keep all that inside. So I think the first thing to do is surround yourself with people. I think that's a really important thing, is to have, even if it's just virtually like this, you have to have some people that you can connect with to speak out loud about this thing. But the internal framework for me is that I think I just always continually reminded myself that the opportunity here is greater than any obstacle I have to overcome in order to achieve it. And so that's a repetitive thought or feeling, and I'm in a business where, fortunately, there is a degree of some immediate gratification. We were fortunate enough to have some early success. So we knew that we got validation in it. And so I knew it was a matter of iterations and maybe, different approaches. So it wasn't like I was going out there into some completely virgin space and trying to make up, some sort of solution that might have a problem to solve. Right. Mm-hmm. I think the key for me as an entrepreneur that's purpose driven is that you first have to find a real problem and you have to really solve it. And you do it with one person, and you find a need and fill it, fill that need and then fund it. And then you turn around and then you try to scale it as much as you can and increase your your impact without reducing the quality of what you're trying to do. So, but I think that really, if you're bumping up against stuff, you're not able to validate what you do, you might be in the wrong place. And so you need to be able to be honest with yourself that if you're either not able to do it emotionally, sometimes you have to be honest that you maybe have to do have it as a side gig. You have to maybe build up to this thing. This is like, being an entrepreneur is a lot like being an athlete. You can't expect to go be a triathlete tomorrow. You start with, go out and run around the block. You have to build endurance for this stuff. Anybody who just jumps into it, it's a skill that you get better and better at because you start to learn how to deal with that doubting voice. You start to learn to deal with external criticism. You start to learn your skin gets thicker in certain areas, but maybe your sensitivity to the right advice or the right voices becomes much more acute. And so it's a process, but it's only a process. It's custom for you, and it's only for you. And if you choose to do it, it's only you have to do it with the knowledge of the risks involved. You're likely going to blow up relationships. You're likely going to blow yourself up. You're likely going to run out of money. You're likely going to be scared existentially. You're likely not going to be able to live a comfy life and a life of growth. And so if you can go into it eyes wide open, and if you also have to be doing something that the money is not the driving force, because when you encounter real obstacles, the money is not going to get you there.
So actually, on that very note, then I want to say this. Well, some people may say, right? Let me be the devil's advocate for a moment. You made a bunch of money before. You had money, so of course you can say that.
No, I actually lost most of my money when the dot-com bubble burst. So I had made a lot of money. I made millions and millions of dollars in my 20s, and I spent it like a drunken sailor, and I had a great time. And I don't regret a single minute of it. I missed out on a lot of opportunities because I was too busy partying, too busy being a dumb, young. I owned my own brokerage firm when I was 23 years old. So I was having a lot of fun. But when the dot-com bubble burst, I think I gave away that money for other reasons too. I think that subconsciously it was like, boom, start from scratch. Almost like dirty money, There was something there that felt like it was time to purge and then be reborn in many ways. So I came into this scrappy. I mean, I started the company that's now 1-800-GOT-MOLD with a borrowed credit card. I bought a van on eBay. I bought a used dog, which I can tell you more about, but and a used van on eBay, and created 1-800-GOT-MOLD. So. And it was fair. And I also ratcheted down my lifestyle so that I could afford, if I needed to flip burgers to pay the rent, I could do it. I had a bicycle instead of a car for the beginning, except for the van. My work van was my car for a number of years. So not exactly the sexiest thing to take a date out on. But anyway, the point is, I did not set myself up set myself up for an easy path. I set myself up for a path where if I came up against obstacles like I knew I would be able to endure them.
So let me ask you this, because people listening to this very much, this is an extension of who I am. One of my core beliefs is Kaizen, everlasting, leaning to my edge, leaning to my discomfort for the sake of challenges, right? So, but sometimes I do feel like I'm maybe too addicted to that challenge. You know what I mean? So I had to actually make an effort to be in the present, being in the now, being grateful, and actually not to always seek the extreme hardship. Does that make sense? It's a yin and a yang, right? So I've trained myself over the years to lean into discomfort. And also these days I had to train myself actually to go back the yin yang, right? To actually not to always pursue the 1%, go for the home run kind of a thing. Does that make sense? So I'm curious to know, from your point of view, how do you, my friend, find that equilibrium? So you're not addicted to the hardship. You're not addicted to, throwing everything, burn the ship every time you have an idea. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure that I have overcome that, to be honest, because I tend to, I don't want to say fear is a great motivator, but I do put myself in uncomfortable situations to force change at times. And I'll notice myself doing things that might be perceived as almost like the preamble to self-sabotage. And so identifying that early is probably an indication of some growing maturity. But the thing is that if you identify as like a type A motivated person, and it's about accomplishment. If you're looking at this as a competitive thing, and there's this idea of accomplishment, a lot of this is doing and then not doing, right? It's almost like meditation. It's the most important thing you can do and not doing, right? And so being able to understand that this is just a competition with yourself, and that really has more to do with sharpening your axe. The whole idea of taking your time, and that this aspirational aspect is the question is, who are you doing this for? And what are you doing this for? Yep. And if you're doing this for headlines, if you're doing this for ego, if you're doing this because to fill a void in yourself, and we all are, right? I mean, we're all in a sense of perpetual discomfort, and we're doing all sorts of things in order to solve, to fix that, right? I mean, that's the human condition. If I've learned one thing from having an infant, is that the day he was born, I noticed we had to rock him constantly, right? And they say you have to soothe the baby, right? And I'm thinking, that guy doesn't have any bills to pay. He doesn't have a worry in the world. Why does he have to be soothed, right? Because we come into this shell, this vehicle, this learning device. We come into this thing in a state of discomfort. It's our human condition. And so we're constantly moving away from comfort or towards pleasure, which is just another form of moving away from discomfort. And so, but when you start to realize that there's a payoff by pursuing discomfort as a way of increasing your quality of life, and then you become competitive about that. And then you find anytime a behavior, this is because I also have a history of addiction. Anytime I'm doing something that is causing me problems, and I know it's causing me problems, and I continue to do it anyway, even if it is in pursuit of greatness, it's not a healthy behavior. And so therefore, if I'm doing this discomfort thing to the point where it's causing other issues, then it's an addictive behavior. And therefore it's counterproductive, and then I need to reel it back in. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I really appreciate that. And what I want to underline is there's a couple of things that you said. You dropped a few gems just in that last few minutes. I want to underline this. That is, why are you doing this? And what are you doing this for? If you can answer that question in a very rational, centered way, then you can have that awareness. Am I doing this for self-importance? Am I using this as a way to fix something, fill a void or whatever? And that, if you can answer that in a very honest way, that's where you can find your way back to equilibrium.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I really appreciate it. Thank you. So again, I wanted to respect your time. And so if you don't mind going to a little bit more tactical things of how you actually, on a day-to-day level, find your center, find your equilibrium, a morning ritual, evening ritual. If you can tell us a little bit about that and the internal awareness side and the external effectiveness side, that would be really appreciated.
Yeah. So I tend to be I mentally am an all or nothing kind of person. And that has been a problem for me. So what I've learned is that I'm a best efforts kind of person, and I'm learning to forgive myself for striving. And then so if I want to meditate, I want to meditate every day, and I'm going to do it twice a day. And if I don't meditate, then I'm not going to do it at all. I just I throw my hand. That's historically it's all or nothing, right? It's binary. And so over the years, I've learned that. You don't have to do everything that you intend to do every single day. But if you do most of it, then you're going to be starting to develop some habits. You're going to start, if you go to the gym every single day, you're never going to have time to heal and recover, right? So you need to have time and contrast in all of these exercises. But for me, a morning routine is extremely important. And then for me, an evening routine is also extremely important. And again, I don't do all of these things every single day. I do write down, I've got a journal every day. And I have my morning routine written down at the top. And I've had forms made that have these things written, and then I find that I'm glossing over it. So I write them down every morning. So in the morning I wake up and I hydrate. I wake up generally with the sun. If I can wake up earlier, I do. So between 5 and 7 is my time, 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. So whether I get up at 5 or not, the point is that's my time. And so I'll get up in the morning and I hydrate immediately between a liter and a liter and a half of filtered water with some mineral drops, maybe some lemon. And then I'll meditate for generally about 20 minutes. I sit and write in my journal. My journal is generally just a free form kind of like mental dump. I generally do something physical in order to wake up. And sometimes I follow my gut. I don't necessarily always do it in the same order. I try to meditate as much as in the morning first thing. But then I do something physical. Generally, I do like 10 sun salutations, some floor stretching, things to just kind of integrate my body, my thoughts, but really trying to stay focused on just being present and aware and grateful. In my journal, oftentimes I'm really doing a gratitude dump, and focusing on that is extremely, extremely important. And having time to have your own thoughts. I do not look at my phone until probably 8 or 9 a.m. I do use it as a timer, but I'm very, very strict about not going into any of the other apps. I don't watch any TV. I don't watch TV at all, really, except for some CNBC. But in the morning, that's my morning. And then around 8:30 or 9, I'll begin looking at emails and starting to map out my day. But also on that same, in my journal where I've got the morning routine written, I've got 3 primary tasks. So I've distilled from the night before what my 3 primary tasks are, and they're always the hardest thing first, right? So the biggest thing, whatever I'm especially avoiding, I will write down as the number one thing. And if you do that, it's like the big rocks thing. If Stephen Covey, if anybody wants to Google Stephen Covey, Big Rocks, it's a great piece. And it talks about prioritizing, making your big stuff be your priority, because little stuff always takes care of itself, or you can delegate those things. And so, and then below that, I'll have some personal items that I want that I'll need to take care of, or open loops that weren't accomplished from the previous day. And then on the other side of the page, I have call notes. And so I'll just be writing whatever's going on throughout the day. So I keep kind of a log of what's happening. But at night, after and throughout the day, I'm taking time to. I've begun doing short 5-minute meditations throughout the day here and there as a reset, because what I've noticed is in my 20-minute meditations, I get most of my value out of the first 3 to 5 minutes.
Is it TM that you do?
I do. Actually, I did TM for a long time. I'm now really just a centered breathing, and so I've kind of dropped the mantra. But I've actually, the mantra, I should say, has in the last 6 months or so, it's actually gone to, whenever I start to notice my mind wandering, I go to let go, let in the inhalation, to go on the exhalation. That really resonates with me. I've been doing a lot of reading. Michael Singer, Untethered Soul, which I know you did a book club piece for, which I loved, is now one of my favorite books. It's in my success library. Letting Go, also by Dr. David Hawkins. The letting go thing has been super powerful, because I'm starting to realize the tensions, mental and physical, that I'm able to drop in a quick 3 to 5 minute being centered. And so that's been the most important thing, stopping to take the time to sharpen your axe. And then at night, I'll decompress. I'll try to keep the phone away for an hour to 2 hours, or any screens, hour to 2 hours before bedtime. Hydrate properly. I try not to eat anything before, more than 3 hours, or less than 3 hours before bedtime, if I can. And then I write down my intentions for the next day on that same journal that I talked about in terms of my major tasks. Oh, I also have major themes. So at the top so it's major themes, morning routine. I don't have it in front of me. Primary tasks, and then my personal items. And so the major themes might be something that I'm wrestling with, right? So that might be, I'm not having coffee after 2 p.m. and I'll write that down. So then that's just a touchstone for me to remember the new behavior that I'm trying to focus on throughout my day. So that's what's in front of me as a constant reminder, because I believe that we are subject to influence. And so I want the influence to be from me, instead of what's going on I want to be an active participant in the creation of my own influence, right? If that makes sense.
I appreciate it. Thank you. 2 more questions. One is, what kind of books are in your success bookshelf? Like what's the most impactful books for conscious entrepreneurs building a business to bring more purpose and meaning in their life? What books would you recommend them to be reading?
I have to tell you that I'm really impressed with everything that Ray Dalio does. That Principles is incredible. He's got a children's book that I just got to. It's a coffee table book. I would actually recommend that anybody who wants to look at Principles that has limited bandwidth like most of us do, start with the children's book, honestly. It sounds crazy, but he lays it out in such a beautiful way. I'm a huge fan of Michael Singer. I believe that his approach to mindfulness and to dealing with the things that go on, those voices in our head, being able to help people understand that doesn't make them crazy, it makes them human, and get rid of a lot of the judgment associated with that is incredibly liberating. And I think part of being an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, is learning how to be a successful human. And being a successful human is starting to see the world truthfully and honestly and lovingly. And I think he does a really beautiful job of sharing that. The other one that I'm really a huge fan of, I just actually heard that Tim Ferriss was promoting it in one of his recent podcasts, and he was saying it was one of the most important books he ever read. And it's one I just recently went back to it for 20 years, and that's Awareness by Anthony DeMello. That is a life-changing book if there ever has been one. But then you can obviously go back to the Think and Grow Riches and the Grow Richer Peace of Mind and all those books. Those are foundational. They're out. You cannot go from. I don't think you can exist in the entrepreneurial sphere without exposing yourself to Napoleon Hill, because that's the bedrock upon which all of the other great thinkers in this space, Tony Robbins and all those other guys, are built upon. But I really do think that this is an inside job. And the best thing you can do is just never stop reading, because the more you read, you follow the influences of the people who got Tony Robbins. You track it all the way back. It all comes back down to the new thought practitioners back in the day. Ernest Holmes and all of those. There's all of these things have a common denominator, and so if you're a seeker, you'll find that, right? But I would say that you just go back to the basics. But Ray Dalio, in terms of current stuff, right there is absolutely at the top of my list.
Actually, I have a very tactical question I want to ask you. So whenever I talk to entrepreneurs, they have tons of ideas in their mind, right? New shiny objects, new business to start, or some projects within their current business. Do you have a way to help them narrow it down to the most important thing?
Yes, I do. And actually, that's a really good question, because I just thought about this. I look at, first of all, I have a new business file. I use Evernote pretty religiously, because it's just, if Getting Things Done by David Allen, fantastic guidebook for people who have a lot of ideas, a lot going on. And Evernote is my dumping ground. Mm-hmm. And so, the other day I was thinking about how do I filter out? You got all these opportunities, and what our most precious commodity is our attention, right? It really truly is. Wherever we dedicate our attention is going to be, that's something that we have a very limited amount of. And if we dedicate it for something meaningful, then we're going to receive meaningful results potentially. And if not, then it's up to the rest of the universe. So I start to say, well, how do I filter that out? And so I start looking at, I only get involved in businesses where there's some sort of a triple bottom line, where there's truly a benefit to everybody involved, right? I don't want to see anybody being disenfranchised in an effort to accomplish the goals of the business, right? So and so, I want to see a true, win-win situation. I believe the philosophy that I subscribe to is doing well by doing good, while having a great time doing it. So that's the first thing. The second filter, right? So now that eliminates a lot of things, right? Then the next filter is, where can I add true value, authentic value here from my own personal experience in a unique way, right? So where in my life have I got an actual way for me to look at this situation and truly add value in a unique, authentic way? And so that narrows it dramatically, right? But if you're willing to go to a place where you see that there is pain in your life that you've been able to, or there's been something where you're uniquely qualified to add value, that's where I would start, right? And so for me, it's like, suicide is a big deal, right? So I've been a student of those kinds of thoughts, but addiction actually came out of that. And so I'm heavily involved in the addiction space, because I had a nice wrestling match with alcohol for about 20 years. And so I look at food is also a big thing for me, and I'll be doing some food businesses in the future along the lines of, in the low glycemic space, because I wasn't able to eat sugar-based foods for a number of years because of the antibiotics from Lyme disease, from wiping out the flora, and obviously the mold thing, right? So everything that I'm interested in, for me, the way it works for me is it has to check all those boxes, and it has to come from a place of true authenticity. Because otherwise, you can hire anybody for this, or you can go, does that make sense? I'm not going to do widgets for the sake of doing widgets, if that makes any sense. And I think that's the mining. You have to be able to look at your life and see where you've got the bumps and bruises. We talked about it a little bit the other day, but the idea of, the Japanese have this method of repairing broken ceramics and broken pottery, where they, instead of trying to repair it like we would in the West, where we try to fix all the cracks so they would be imperceptible, rather they enhance them, and they put gold and silver powder on those cracks and then put them on the shelf for display, which is where I think that we could learn a few things from them on, because at the end of the day, it's your cracks. It's where you're broken that the beauty is. It's where you're broken that makes you unique. And just like a bone that's broken is stronger in that place than it is anywhere else, and the weld is a weld is stronger than its native metal. The same thing goes for us. And so I'm a big fan of celebrating people's wounds, because it's from those wounds that you have perspective and strength and uniqueness, and that's worth celebrating.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I mean, we cover a lot of grounds in this podcast in a short amount of time. You did not disappoint. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Is there any last thing, if there's one thing that they would do, based on your recommendation, what's that one thing that they should be doing out of everything that we talked about?
It's going to be the most annoying thing, because everyone says it: meditate. Seriously. Find a way to cultivate mindfulness as and real meditation. You can do your headspace and all that stuff. That's the gateway to the real meditation. But get comfortable with silence. Get comfortable with the discomfort. And meditation is the way for you to start to separate the voices in your head. Meditation is the way for you to start to disconnect from this idea that my thoughts are me. And more importantly, meditation starts to get you to the point where you can see impulses come and you don't grab them. You can see things come along your way and not be moved by them. And that's what an entrepreneur needs to be able to go back to your question about distractions and how you do. By meditating well, you start to realize, or meditating consistently, you start to realize that not every shiny object needs to be responded to. And that's the same. It's the same thing when entrepreneurs have all these ideas coming. You keep a file for that stuff. And if it doesn't meet any of those things that I mentioned, then maybe it isn't for you. If you're a purpose-driven entrepreneur, discard the shiny stuff. If your buddy wants to get involved in something that's maybe a little bit off kilter, it might be fun and exciting, but maybe it's pushing the wrong button inside. But meditation will give you the freedom, that space between that I seek, the space between. There's a quote on my wall, I'll leave you with this, that says, in between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies your power, freedom, and choice. And that, to me, is the most powerful thing. I have that on my wall, and I look at that every single day. So cultivating that space between the thought and the impulse, the thought and the words, the thought and the action. And the fastest way to do that is through through conscious attention to being present through meditation.
I so appreciate you, my friend.
Likewise.
So many things I can follow up, and we can go even deeper. Hopefully, we can do another part 2 and just do it on these type of things. But again, I want to respect your time with your family, so we'll just wrap here. Thank you, Jason, for sharing your wisdom, sharing your tactics, share your framework, share your story. So inspiring. I look forward to getting to know you a little bit more in the future.
Absolutely. Next time I'm out in LA, I'll definitely ping you. And obviously, next time you're in the Big Apple, you do the same.
Hey, listeners, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the nuggets of wisdoms, go to bit.ly/Noble Warrior Review and leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you're getting out of this podcast. This will really help us attract other people like you and share these nuggets of wisdoms to others just like you. Okay, do that right now, bit.ly/Noble Warrior Review. Thanks a lot.